Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Downloaded over 150 times, find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Under the cover of darkness, on the eve of International Women's Day in March 2017, a bronze statue was rushed into place in downtown New York City. But this wasn't any statue or a random location. In fact, it was a 50-inch depiction of a young girl standing strong directly across from the famously large and powerful charging bronze bull of Wall Street. Fearless Girl, as she became known, was literally an overnight sensation, garnering over 1 billion Twitter impressions in the first 12 hours and eventually reaching 4.6 billion Twitter impressions and more than 215,000 Instagram posts over 12 weeks, including an Instagram post from yours truly. This was a viral triumph that originally was supposed to be a quick stunt, but New Yorkers so loved Fearless Girl that a petition signed by more than 40,000 people demanded that the statue stay put through 2018. And since this is a show about marketing and marketers, it shouldn't surprise you that there were some savvy marketers behind Fearless Girl with their own courageous story to tell. The brand is State Street Global Advisors, the third largest asset manager in the world with 2.7 trillion, that's trillion in assets under management. And their CMO is Stephen Tisdalle, who, drumroll please, is today's guest. Hi, Stephen. Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite.
Thank you. It's a real privilege to be with you today.
Okay, so Fearless Girl shows up on March 2017, and it is this international sensation. But I know, as someone who's been in this business a long time, that a lot of planning and a lot of thinking goes into this. And I've read a fair amount of what you guys have done and your sort of commitment to women on boards and so forth. Let's talk about briefly the strategy and the thinking behind why make this statement? Why put a fearless girl in front of a charging bull?
Yeah, that's a good question. So how this came about was we knew that we had this amazing asset stewardship program where we are voting for greater gender diversity on the companies we invest in on behalf of investors, in addition to other issues such as climate and board governance and water, etc. And so how do we bring that to life? How do you, in a simple way, communicate something like asset stewardship? It's not the type of term that would immediately resonate with people unless you're really steeped in the category. That was one thing. The other is we had a series of investments. One in particular was the She Gender Diversity Index, which invests in companies that have a significant majority of women on the leadership and on their board. And how do we bring these two things to life? How do we communicate that in a way that immediately resonates with what the objective is of these programs?
So let me ask you a question about that. It's so interesting. So you have this She Fund. Tell me the name of it again. The fund is She.
Yep,
She.
That's
okay.
The actual ticker, if you will.
Is SHE. Okay. Interesting. So you have the She Fund, and you have an asset stewardship, which if you said none of us really, those of us who aren't living and breathing Wall Street don't really understand. But you're moving in this world of purpose branding where you're recognizing that women have a more important role to play on boards and at companies. And so that sort of seems like that must have been the brief.
That's right. How do you, and I had a very small budget, and we knew that International Women's Day was coming up, which was the first year anniversary of when we launched the She Gender Diversity Index Fund. And we also thought it was an opportune time to really bring to light, well, how are we taking measures to protect the long-term growth interests of our client portfolios? And what better time to do that than on International Women's Day in March of 2017. And so the brief was fairly straightforward. It was, detailing a lot around, what our voting track record has been, what our objectives are, why we believe what we believe, because companies that have greater gender diversity on their boards and leadership outperform companies that don't. And there's an inordinate amount of studies and facts that back that up. And so that's a principle that we, believe in as an asset manager, and we want to enact that principle. And so how do we communicate that principle?
And when I think about it, it's funny because if you just give folks the facts and you say, hey, when there are more women on the board, the companies do better. That's a nice sort of rational thing. But then when I see this strong girl facing the bull, suddenly this story, it's amazing how this statue communicates all of that and more. It's just, were you surprised, or were your folks surprised when, literally the day that thing arrives, that it's just this amazing, that people bring all of this larger story to the table just by seeing the statue? Oh,
well, of course. We had, first of all, asset managers are not in the statue making business. So there was quite a bit of risk to go ahead with this. And I have to give credit to our leadership. When, I was working with our agency partners, and we settled on the idea of doing a statue of a girl, and there were various permutations of her, and what her stance would be. One of the things I didn't want it was to be a defiant, she's taking the world on and shaking her fist. Instead, it needed to communicate optimism, that this is a really positive thing, that we're not trying to ram down people's throats, that these are, facts that, do impact long-term performance. And we want to appeal to everyone on this topic. And it was never meant to be a political statement. It was meant to be about performance.
It's funny. And so did some people interpret it as a political statement? Well,
I think it came. Why Fearless Girl, I think, was so successful is this was, in advance of the hashtag Me Too movement. It had not yet become such a politicized issue, not just within the U.S. but around the world. That followed months later. We were before that, and it really, I think, part of the reason that Fearless Girl's been so successful is it really is just about the message and the facts versus trying to make a big political statement. It's really about performance, and it's about how the economy will significantly be bigger. McKinsey has done studies on this that show if you had, females participating in the economy in the equivalent way that men, you would see another 28, trillion in GDP. That is, a fact. And I think most people, appreciate that. And so I think that, to answer your question though, had we anticipated the success? Absolutely not. We thought this would be a 1 week, maybe 2 week installation. And, we'd get some Northeastern, press coverage, maybe a few million hits on our web properties and social media outlets. And we would call it a day, and that would be successful. And we'd bring the statue back and, install her in our offices.
It's which is amazing. And you mentioned that the financial service is not an industry that's famous for risk taking. What were as you were assessing this, and we talk a lot on the show about the courage to sort of make bold statements. What were some of the key things that it took to persuade the internal audience? Because that's often what kills a sort of a riskier idea. What were some of the things that got folks on board?
I think the fact that the message of what we were going to communicate was very simple, very clear, and was true to something that we have been doing for a couple of years in the asset stewardship program. So no one was debating that. And that was something to be celebrated. The other was that I had said, in taking this role, we either are going to fit in the category or we're going to lead. And we've done a great job in fitting in the category since our inception over 40 years ago. But if we're going to lead the category, we're going to have to make some bold statements and have real conviction. And that has to then be evidenced in the way we communicate. And so this, I think, form of communication is absolutely out-of-the-box thinking for the asset management category and even for the broader financial services category. There was no big banners, there was no big slogans. It was a simple statue with a very clear message that we were ready to tell behind it. So that was, I think, attractive to the leadership. There was a lot of nervousness, though, because the time, we were under enormous constraints on the time front, which I'm happy to talk about, some of the behind scenes, if you will, that went on. But decisions had to be made quickly, and this one went all the way to the top, to the CEO. And he thought about it, and he said, I'm prepared to do it. Let's move forward.
And was there some sort of risk mitigation plan in place just in case somebody said, well no, look at this, these guys are putting a statue in the middle of Wall Street. What's up with that? I mean, were you?
I think there was, we've received our fair share of criticism, albeit nowhere in proportion to the positive, commentary that we've received. One of the concerns was by putting a statue there that we would be making a statement that we were leading as far as gender diversity within our own organization. And that was never meant to be the message. It was more around our investment philosophy and how we are trying to enact values and beliefs that that create long-term performance for our shareholders. And the concern was that this would open up the limelight about us. And in some respects, I said that's okay because we're all on this journey together. Our diversity levels we're proud of. By no means are they at where we want them to be. But if we were to wait to perfectly get our house in order, we would miss the opportunity to really make a difference. And, time moves on, and you got to seize the moment on something like this. And so that was where the risks were. And what mitigated those risks was how tight our message was around what we were trying to communicate. It was about our asset stewardship. It's about inspiring the companies that we invest in to change their board composition. And by the way, you can rest assured this was a huge inspiration for us to walk the talk and change our diversity levels. And that there's been as much impact on our company as there has been externally. And that's been a great thing that's happened with this campaign.
Okay. I love all of those things that you just said. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to break down some of those things because I think it's so interesting. So we'll be right back.
Hey, it's Drew. I have a question for you, the audience. How good is your content? We all believe in content marketing, but is your content good enough for you to share it with the CEO and want him to share it with his peers? Is it good enough for your salespeople to share with their prospects? Heck, is it good enough for you to share it with your mom? If the answer to all of those questions was no, well, it's not that good, and you're also celebrating things like National Donut Day, it's probably a good idea to do a content audit. And I know just the person to help you out with that. Text content audit to 917-679-8852. That's actually my cell phone. And we can talk about how to get your content to be world class and do all the things that you know it should be able to do. So you can text Content Audit to 917-679-8852. And let's figure out together how to get your content to cut through.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is Stephen Tisdalle, the CMO of State Street Global Advisors. And we've been talking about Fearless Girl, and one of the things that we preach here at Renegade is great marketing comes from some internal purpose that you can sort of align with. And when it really works, employees get excited about it as well. And in fact, what's so interesting that Stephen just mentioned is that, in fact, it can change the culture of the organization. And I do remember reading an article about, and it probably was New York Times Magazine or something equivalent, about how by you all taking a stand about putting more women in board seats and so forth, it did force you to think about it in your organization. And you did sort of say, hey, we're imperfect. And you know what's amazing is that that's a strategy in and of itself. I mean, it's certainly something that Salesforce has done, right? They said, hey, we don't have enough women, and so in senior positions, and they're not getting paid as much. So talk a little bit about that. Once you brought up this issue, you raised to the forefront, you got billions of impressions about this conversation about more women in leadership positions. And then suddenly everybody's saying, well, what about, you're in a glass house, you better clean up your own situation. How did that sort of, it didn't come as a surprise, but it must have at least galvanized, things happen probably faster than they might have happened had you not take this bold statement.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a dilemma that, we overcame by saying either you take a very defensive posture, and, I absolutely would never recommend one does this. There's something about being transparent and being open and letting people know where you really stand. There's something attractive about that, authenticity. I think we were able to be very upfront with our leadership, saying, here's how we're going to tackle any kind of criticism that would come. There's going to be some root canals that will be done on us. There's been issues in the past associated with our brand. And we need to hit those head on. In some cases, we need to say, here's where we were wrong and we paid the fine, or here's what we're doing about it. But, we're all on this journey together, and we're embracing these values. We're trying to influence the companies that we work with to embrace these. And it's interesting, there's value and values, and this is really all about value. It's not imposing our values, it's saying there is greater value when you do this. And that, I think, that message sustained us through any kind of criticism. It allowed us to be very open, transparent, and it also, I think, fostered a sense of enthusiasm within the organization to, when they saw the success of Fearless Girl, how do we get infected with this ourselves and start to embrace change? And that's, I think, been one of the most wonderful things. Most campaigns are all external, and most of the employees, might be interested about the creative aspects and take some pride saying, that's our communications out there. In this case, it was all of that, plus getting people to think about it and think about the type of people we recruit, and think about the type of organization and the composition of talent that we want to have.
And I think there's some really interesting little nuggets in there that first, that you weren't saying holier than thou, just do good for good's sake. What was so interesting, this is do well, do better by doing good, put more women on boards because your performance will improve. So it was a as you said, it was about business value. But anyway, what's interesting to me is you had been, and this is another important thing, when you suddenly go out and make a big statement like this, you had already been doing this as an organization, at least investing in this area for a while. So you weren't just sort of grabbing this and saying, hey, look, let's talk about this now. You had a track record there. So that was one. Number two, that there was this sort of, okay, they're going to be putting the spotlight on us. We better be prepared. So you had anticipated what the criticism was, and it enabled organizational change to align with the values that you were proposing. So anyway, I think it's really interesting. I want to circle back to something you've said a couple times. There's a simple message here, and I say a lot, the simple is hard, right? But there was a simple message that you were communicating with Fearless Girl. But the statue was just there, and people were taking pictures of it, and it became, this social media success. How did you then layer on the story? In other words, make sure that the actual story and the facts behind the story got told?
Well, it was so the Fearless Girl campaign is very much not just about an idea. It's actually about the actions that we take. So it came down to the messaging about what are we doing in terms of our voting track record. And, we just announced actually last week the results of what has happened since the installation of Fearless Girl. So we have a whole division that runs our asset stewardship program that works with proxy voting on the companies we invest in on behalf of shareholders. And more than 300 companies that, we reached out to have actually responded to our call by adding a female director, and another 28 have committed to do so. And these are companies that had no women on their board. So, from that standpoint, I think it's not just about having the idea and people talking about gender diversity and the value it creates. It's about the actions that we're taking to make the change happen. And this is a program that isn't just dedicated to the United States. It also extends into the UK, Australia, and then we added Japan and Canada last year. And we've started to see in Japan, just recently, 40 companies take action by adding a female director, and 11 more are committed to doing so in the near future. And, we're seeing in Canada, almost a quarter, 23% of companies are taking action by adding a female director. So, this is a program that is being very successful, and that's the real headlines that we're trying to come out with.
It's literally, you started a movement. And, so I think I read, 300 companies may not seem like a lot, but I think you were only targeting 750. So
initially, that's right. So there's only so many companies that we can target at a given time. And we're working, once again, it's working with those companies. It's trying to understand their recruitment policies, understand their intent before we take and decide our voting action with them. So it's more of trying to have a partnership than a militant stance or combative stance with them. And, that takes time. It's a quality program about how we've structured it. And the amazing thing is within 6 weeks of installing Fearless Girl, a lot of our other competitors have similar programs. It's not like we're the only one. They too started to really come out and exercise their proxy voting power. And so you didn't just have 2.7 trillion at work, you now had 13 trillion at work. And that is something that we're proud of, that it wasn't just about our brand and what we're doing, but also bringing others along who, could benefit with this type of communication. And I think the whole category has been mobilized in a unique way.
It's very cool. Okay, we're going to take another break, and then when we come back, we're going to really dive into some of the lessons that are learned, because this was lightning in a bottle, but there's some really key messages that I think that any marketer could take home with them. So stay with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is Stephen Tisdalle, CMO at State Street Global Advisors, and we've been talking about the Fearless Girl. If you haven't seen the statue, visit renegadethinkersunite.com in the show notes. There'll be a picture of myself in front of that statue, holding the pose. And one of the things that I'm a big fan of is Amy Cuddy's work and her famous TED Talk. And I'm curious because that pose is often talked about as the power pose that Amy speaks about. Did that come up at all in any of your planning discussions or thinking?
Well, yes, there was obviously the stance was very important, and we wanted this to have a very optimistic, as I mentioned earlier, an optimistic tone versus a defiant tone or a combative, militant tone. I think everybody wants their daughter or their sister to feel confident in who they are, and that they have a different perspective. They have something to contribute. They are talented. They have a real role to play in the economy, and they're ready to jump in. And so, we took, there were quite a few ideas about what the age of the girl. There was debate whether it should be a woman or a much younger girl. And, the statue is an 8-year-old girl. And one thing I was pretty adamant about is that the posture really reflect that confidence and not being afraid, and thus the name Fearless Girl was really was birthed from that.
So the power pose and power posing, for any of you, I know that Amy's TED Talk has been one of the most viewed. It's like 40 million, I think, at this point. We'll link to it on the website. I love this. Oftentimes before I present, I do a power pose to sort of get myself psyched up. And then I talk to a lot of, when I give my keynotes, I often get everybody else to do this power posing, because we can sort of, by taking that pose, again, it's not about defiance. You're absolutely right, and I regret actually using that word at the very beginning of the show. It is about getting confident and convincing yourself that you can be confident and bold. And what I like about it is you guys must have been doing some power posing before you put this thing out there, because this was certainly a big risk. Okay, so when we look at this program, it was far more successful, at least in terms of this initial part of the story. In fact, the statue I think it's still in place, right?
Yeah, the statue is still down in Bowling Green. We are going to be relocating her to be across from the New York Stock Exchange, and that will happen later this fall. We've been working with the City of New York, the Mayor of New York's office in particular, because the location that she's currently at, she's standing 9 feet in the middle of Broadway.
Right.
This was meant to be a temporary installation, And, due to the overwhelming groundswell of support, the city asked that we keep her there on an interim basis. We want a more permanent home that is safe and secure. You have people climbing over barriers and running across the street to have their photo taken. It's terribly not safe, especially for young children. It's very crowded down there. And so we thought, what more appropriate place than across from the New York Stock Exchange, because that's where the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ and other exchanges around the world, that's where we're actually exercising our proxy vote, and in publicly traded companies. So it just seemed like an appropriate venue.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and in fact, it gives you a chance to rebirth her in some ways and rethink.
Right. And she's due for a rebronzing. There's been so many, probably millions of photos taken with her that we've got to. She is a bronze statue, but the patina is wearing off and she's becoming very shiny. So we're going to be doing she'll get a slight touch up before we relocate her across from the New York Stock Exchange.
Awesome. A little makeover, if you will. Not a makeover, just a quick visit to the spa for her.
Yep.
Well, she deserves it. As an 8-year-old, she's been working pretty darn hard for the last couple of years, or certainly a year and a half. So thinking about this program, again, unique. And I want to go back to the strategy for a moment, because all good things start with there. You mentioned you as an organization, that following had been sort of part of the ethos of the company, and that you really as a CMO wanted to bring on a leadership perspective. So you took a stand in an area that no one really had taken a stand. You had this symbol that represented this stand that started the conversation. And one of the things that I want to point out to everyone, this is a statue. There are no words. But the story, it speaks volumes. And so you think about the symbolic nature of things and what this little girl represents to so many people, and allowing them to sort of tell their own story around it. But comes from a place of strength and leadership and wanting to differentiate your brand. You don't get to an idea like this unless you really want to lead and take a stand and take a chance, because you had to take a stand like this fearless girl, right? You couldn't just put that out there and then say, oh, well, we're kind of whatever. We invest in women and businesses and men's, whatever. It really did force you to stand as strong as this young girl. From your standpoint, we got a group of marketers now listening. What are some of the lessons? Because again, I'm going to use this term lightning in a bottle. You had this sort of ice bucket challenge moment where something that you were planning to do for a week became this international symbol, which is really just mind-boggling. But what are some of the lessons you think that other marketers could take away from your experience with Fearless Girl and the whole campaign?
Yeah, I think, it's really about the message. You've got to have a very clear idea about what you're communicating and what is the message at the time that you're going to do something like this, and what is the message ongoing? Does it have a life? Does the message, can it evolve into a story? And what we knew here is that we have a asset stewardship program where we're voting on these companies. We're going to continue voting. We're one of the largest investors in the world. We represent, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of investors. And so we knew that this message and this program has some real longevity to it. Even though this was going to be a temporary installation to just highlight it, we had no idea that this was lightning in a bottle at the time. As a matter of fact, I was very worried that this whole thing could just fall flat and be a bit of a ho-hum. And, after a week, it's all over with. It made it easier because I wasn't spending a big sum of money to do it. The second lesson is you have to have, though, the goods behind that message. So you can't just come out with something that resonates emotionally and rationally, but then you really don't have the goods. And as I said earlier, the goods were not about us as an organization. It's about how we are trying to enact change in the companies we invest in on behalf of investors. So we had that voting record for a couple of years, and we knew we would continue with that voting record. The third is you got to have the quality of the experience. Like this is where it was lightning in a bottle. The expression of Fearless Girl, I got to give credit to Kristen Visbal, who is the artist, to be able to capture the optimism, the confidence, the unique talents, the perspective that young girls and women have was captured in that experience. It wasn't overly commercialized. That's another aspect to it. Like you said earlier, there were no big words. There's no big banners. We didn't do a TV ad at the time. The fourth lesson is you got to tie it back to the company's business strategy. So in our case, we are one of the largest index investors. We also have a very big active investment capability. So for those of you that know what I'm talking about, we'll get the meaning of that. But we actually want to be seen as leaders in how we generate greater long-term value for our clients. And that's through offering a set of products, a set of strategies, investment strategies, and also other elements to the way we invest, such as asset stewardship. So this particular campaign harkened right back to what we're trying to promote in terms of our difference in the way we invest. The fifth lesson learned is you got to anticipate and prepare for public reaction, both the positive and the negative. And we were really geared for the negative and a little bit for the positive. We had no idea that we would be dealing with, 1.5 billion social engagements within, 2 days of the installation, that then expanded to over 6.5 billion in the subsequent weeks. And the volume of inbound calls, being able to deal with that, the number of questions that you start getting asked, people wanting to use Fearless Girl in TV shows and movies and wanting to, commandeer her almost, if you will. We hadn't put in all the policies and procedures of how we would deal with that. And, making sure that we didn't lose sight. What were we trying to communicate? What was the objective? And I think we did a good job of that, but just really planning that out. I can't overemphasize how critical that is when you're going to do something like this.
Yeah. Wow. Those are great. That's a great summary. Usually I do that at the end of the show. I think I have one last question for you. Marketing in theory is, this is a perfect example. I use the term rethink your drink, that all marketing is essentially about getting people to rethink about your brand or the thing that you're offering. And I imagine that this had a tremendous impact on the way people thought about your brand.
Oh, I think so. Obviously, it's still early days. It's only been 18 months since we installed her. There's much more to our brand than just this one area, and that's why I'm doing other, I think, category-leading things. We just launched a series with Elizabeth Banks on Crazy Enough to Work, and that's a video and podcast series that takes companies in the mid-cap space that everybody knows about the large cap, but people aren't as familiar with the mid-cap, which has outperformed the large cap over a 20-year period. and really bringing those to life and understanding the cultures of these companies and what makes them tick, and what are the insights that we can provide that give people just a little bit closer look at them. And that's a series that is pretty innovative. It had extraordinary engagement since its launch in late July and into early August.
Very cool. All right. Well, we're going to see more fearlessness, we'd hope, from State Street in the coming years, and excited to see that and watch you guys, sort of jump into this, assume the mantle of leadership in an industry that probably could use some, given international reputation of Wall Street. So first, Stephen, thank you so much for being on the show. Congratulations on this amazing success. Thanks again for all the insights that you brought to this program.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
And so to all of my listeners, I want you, when you're done, to go look at the picture of Fearless Girl. I want you to assume that pose just for a second and remind yourself that it does take courage to be a great marketer, but it has tremendous rewards. And as always, and until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.